welcome to Kings of War Wednesday. Abyssal Dwarf, Clash of Kings, Hopes. Hello there, welcome to yet another Kings of War Wednesday, episode number 3 now. That is some pretty consistent video posting right there. And in this episode, I'm going to tell you right now that I do not have the current Clash of Kings. When I say current, I mean the brand new one that's technically not released yet, but some people seem to have it in their hands. I do not have one of those. I do not feel that rigid spine in my hand. However, I have seen all the leaks or the revealed rules that have popped up all over social media, and I'm going to talk about those a little bit as well, specifically as it impacts the Abyssal Dwarfs. But I'm also going to be talking about what I hoped for and what I still hope for going forward for the various units in this faction, some of which I know are having changes made to them in the Clash of Kings 22, some of which may not, but we can just talk about them in future terms anyways. So, hello there. I'm going to be guiding you through this wonderful slideshow of my beautifully painted Abyssal Dwarf army as we talk about each unit, and then a bit about the units that I don't own and what changes could potentially encourage me to add them. So, with the Clash of Kings, typically this is going to be a little bit of a different book compared to some of the previous ones, because if we look at the... what's it even called now, the last one? Halpi's Rift, is it? The last one that contained Clash of Kings. Not much Kings of War action had been played during that period, and there weren't many sweeping changes, so I think they took the opportunity to make it a little bit more narrative focused, that book. So this one, tournaments are fully back on the menu, and it's time to start squeezing some tournament juices and unleashing all that army listy goodness. So, what you would typically get is a few unit changes, a few extra rules thrown in, sprinkled on, and then formations, which they took out at the start of this edition, which are currently on their way back in with this book, apparently. So, there are a couple of changes that I've heard of that impact units within this army, so when I get to them, I will touch on those. So, let's start here. Now, I've used this infantry block as Immortal Guard, and I've also used them as Black Souls, depending on the point level and what kind of units I need, combined with everything else I've got. Typically I run them as Immortal Guard regiments though, and I don't think I need much extra persuasion to take those. I don't think they need too much extra spice. I think they're pretty spicy already. And the same could be said for Black Souls, really. I don't see any issue with those two core Abyssal Dwarf infantry units. I don't think they need any kind of amendment in a Clash of Kings book. Were they to get one, it would probably, in my opinion, be down to either a formation, if people don't think they get played enough perhaps at Mantic, or perhaps if a character comes along or is amended so that it has some kind of effect on them. So, based on something that's coming up shortly, one of the other units, there's a slight change to one of them that could impact these infantry units and make them a bit spicier, but I don't think they really need any help. They're already a worthy addition, I think. So, this is the unit I'm talking about, the Hellfane, which I know, because I've seen it out there, has been reduced in points from 280 to 265, and it's gained Rampage, I believe it's called, D6. So that is where you get additional attacks against small things, so against infantry, cavalry, swarms, and so on. So that will make it more usable and easier to fit it into a list, because if you look at what it's competing with, usually it would be something like the Greater Obsidian Golem, who is pretty spicy. But with the extra attacks this thing has, because of the way you typically want to use it, because it affects infantry around it in a positive way, you would want it in the middle of an infantry-on-infantry battle, like leading that infantry charge into the enemy infantry perhaps. So you're going to be against the smaller things. You're not going to be using it to go monster hunting, maybe, if you're using it with its best synergies with your infantry units alongside it. So with those extra attacks on the kind of units you would hope that your main infantry battle line is fighting against, then that does add a bit of spice to it, and therefore you're more likely to take it So it's going to boost those infantry units that I talked about a moment ago. The points coming down is very nice. Is it enough? We'll find out after a few games whether it's got enough to justify that change. And not being even higher of a change. But I'm definitely going to give it a try. It's a very nice model, even though the nose hangs about 50% of the way off the base, so you have to turn it sideways to fit it into combat, or put it onto some massive platform so that its nose pokes over the top of the enemy. But anyway, Hellfane, interesting changes, slight boost to infantry if this thing is taken more often. That's the main takeaway there. Next, the Ancient Winged Half-Breeds. And you've got the two options, of course, you've got the Iron Caster and the Overmaster. I don't think they need huge tweaks. I personally think the fact you don't see a lot of them out there, compared to some of the other units, which I'll get to, would maybe suggest that they're a teensy bit too expensive, but I don't think they're too ridiculous at all. I like using it. I think possibly a small points reduction. If you're going to add rules to it to make it a bit more enticing, I'm not sure what you would do. What could you give it? You could give it brutal if it doesn't already have it. What else could you put on this thing? Dread, maybe something like that. Something just to give it a bit of added spice if you don't want to reduce the points. Overall, I don't think it's too bad of a choice currently, though, but maybe just a little tweak. Grotesques and the Grotesque Champion. Grotesques, pretty sure, do not need any kind of tweaking. The Champion, I don't think I've seen a lot of him out there in the community, so maybe he needs something. So that would be a candidate for perhaps a formation. If you take a Grotesque and a Grotesque Champion and a Grotesque unit, then maybe the Champion can have some kind of buff. Although actually saying that, I think he's already technically getting one, because to the best of my knowledge all inspiring units are fully universal inspiring now. So things like the Grotesque Champion, was that even inspiring? I'm going to have to get the book out and check now. Where is my Kings of War rulebook? There we go. So, the Half-Breed Champion is definitely inspiring. I don't know if this guy is, actually. So, we might have to talk about that when we get to the Half-Breed Champion. But this guy might not be inspiring. I seem to remember that he's not, which is why I'm just going to double check for you. So, Abyssal Grotesque Champion. No, I was correct. He is not inspiring. So, he doesn't get the boost. The Half-Breed Champion, who was already favoured over this guy, generally, does get a bit of a boost, which we'll get to in a minute. But some kind of formation, maybe, to give the Grotesque Champion a little boost when he's taking an army with other Grotesques, perhaps would be nice. Put some extra rules on him. Maybe even give him inspiring in those circumstances. That would make him a more tempting choice compared to the Half-Breed Champion, who just seems to have... doesn't quite have everything over the Grotesque Champion, but he's got the fact that he's individual, can just charge off anywhere, makes him more versatile, and is also inspiring. So I think that's just a more obvious choice than the Grotesque Champion currently, so maybe a little tweak to that. Normal Grotesque's absolutely fine, nothing required there. Decimators. I think they do need a bit of a change, because you don't see many of them. I always thought they were a teensy bit too expensive. Let me just have a look in the book here, see how much they actually are, because it's been a while since I've run them. I don't know if I've actually run them in this edition at all yet. I think I probably have, but not to any great degree. Let's have a look. So yeah, the Horde, 260 points, Regiment, 155, Troop, 115. On paper, it doesn't sound like an obscene price, but I always felt they were too expensive whenever I was looking through the list and comparing them to my other options. So, oh yeah, the mobile Katsuchan rocket launcher I always thought was pretty poor and not a worthy investment for those 20 points. So that would be something that would be a better candidate for a change rather than the whole unit, perhaps. Because that's not something that I would consider taking. Next. Let's see. Hello, Lazy Pirate Painting, and Graham as well. Hello there. this is going out live, but I anticipate the debate around this, because it's not going to be a very long episode, so I would anticipate the debate afterwards is going to rage in the comments, which is where I'll refer back to and respond to all of those, as is the new tradition with Kings of War Wednesday. It won't always be a live occurrence, this show. It depends what the topic is and whether that lends itself to a live format or recorded footage. So, next. Now, this is Arhak's Soulbinder. Some say it's the most hideous model Mantic have ever produced. I think it's a work of pure genius. The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. It's definitely got old school charm to it. It's a nice piece of metal. They don't sell it anymore. I had to find it online at an obscure shop in Scotland to be delivered here. And I really like this guy. I use him as Infernox, which not at all confusing since they brought Infernox back into the game. But Infernox is of course a defense 6. Small compared to some of the other big stuff. Let's just look at his stats a second so I can be fully informative here. So yeah, dash 13, defense 6. So dash 13 is around about the line where being defense 6 isn't a guarantee of survival anymore. If you're defense 6 and you're a horde of golems and you've got dash 17, then yes, random bit of shooting has no chance of taking you out, really. If you dash 13, a couple of wounds done on you, a couple of plinked wounds, and suddenly the dice roll actually has to happen, which isn't always the case with the armies I put out with Abyssal Dwarfs. So I always felt the nerve was maybe a point too low, perhaps. 140 points, and he competes with some really juicy stuff in this army. So I always found it tough to fit him in, especially at 2,000 points. And above that, you just want to throw in all the crazy toys. You don't want to be spending a lot of points on Infernox. If you want to put together a full defense 6 battle line, then he is useful. I've used him before, and he's fun to use. One of the few units in this list that has wild charge as well, so it makes him a little bit faster. And he's got brutal, crushing strength 2, thunderous charge 1, nimble, and vicious, as you'd expect everything to have vicious. So he's actually got a decent profile, but I would bump up his nerve a teensy bit for his price. I think you would see him a bit more. If he was dash 14 or even 15, wouldn't that be wild? I would definitely want to run this guy. He would be, maybe 15 is pushing it a bit, but I think he needs to go up a teensy bit in nerve. So that's what I would do with him. Next, Hex Caster. So the Hex Caster is going to benefit from a general rules change to the Hex spell, because I think the change they made, was it at the start of this edition where they, or was it in the previous Clash of Kings book, where they changed him so that you couldn't switch out Hex for weakness for free anymore. You had to actually pay if you wanted to have, you could have to have both spells, you couldn't just replace one with the other. I think that was it, because I used to take him with weakness and use him against enemies that were charging into my defense 6 battle line, and that was quite a nice combo. But since they made him a bit more expensive, I've found him not as tempting to put in there. I'm sure he's still got use, and especially now, because Hex has got a bit of a boost, it can now target Spellcaster 0, as far as I'm aware. That's what I've been reading online. So there are certain casters in the game that you just couldn't Hex before for some reason, but now you can. So that makes Hex a more viable prospect, and the Hex Caster obviously comes with Hex. So you could just run Hex, you wouldn't even need to bother with weakness necessarily anymore, because I always looked at weakness as the superior spell before. Now, I don't know, because most armies you're going to find something you're going to be able to use Hex on. And very tempting. Next, yeah, so I don't think he needs much of a tweak. I think that is an improvement enough, the Hex spell being boosted. War machines now. So I always used them as the heavy mortars. So there's this one, which is actually a rocket launcher, and this one, which is actually a heavy mortar, but I just used them all as heavy mortars because that was the hot thing to do. They haven't been seeing much of the action lately. I found that the reduced number of hits and multiple shots, depending who you're up against, it doesn't always do what you need it to. If you're up against an army with lots of regeneration, the more reliable but lower damage over the course of the game isn't necessarily as good. If you're against an army like that with heal and regeneration, radiance of life and all that good stuff, then what you want is to do one big splash into the enemy and just take them out in one go every now and then with a bit of luck. You don't want to just plink damage onto them. If you're against something that doesn't have much access to healing or regeneration, then arguably it's better because it's more reliable. You can weaken things, soften them up so that your combat units can do the serious work and take them out in one hit, which is something I've talked about in the past with my goblins and the strategy for the trolls, who aren't the most reliable fighters, hitting on 4s. But if you can whittle wounds off them with shooting first, then suddenly they're a much scarier prospect, and the lesser obsidian golems actually have the same attack profile as the trolls, so they're in a similar boat there. So I'm not sure what I would do with war machines if they need any kind of tweak at all. I don't think you want to be giving them formations to encourage people to take multiple war machines. That seems to be what they've nudged people away from in recent times. People just don't enjoy facing them, which is an issue with how they worked before. And the way they work now, it seems like they're more enjoyable to face because they're less unit deleting. So I think not much required there. Lesser obsidian golems, they're always the core of my army. I don't think anything is really required there. I find them pretty good value when they're compared to certain similar comparable units in other armies. So I've played against Abyssals quite a lot lately, as you've probably seen on this channel with the battle reports. I'd compare them to like the Molochs. They have the same base size. They're not far off each other in points, but I think the golems are just better. They've got much higher. I think the Molochs are only defense 4. So these are obviously defense 6. But what's always worth remembering is that you have to pay the tax of, usually you're going to want an Iron Caster if you're bringing multiple golem units, because you're going to want to surge them occasionally and you can also heal them. So with the boost to inspiring units, the fact that they can inspire everything now means that units that previously relied on a conditional inspiring source as like a tax to boost them, like the Iron Caster, then I think these guys have already got a bit of a boost through that. So I think that's enough. Next, Basusu, or Susan. I think she's still fine. She got toned down a little bit when she lost Vicious in this edition, but I don't think that's ever stopped me from putting her in my list. Absolutely fine. I don't think people need any kind of formation with Basusu and Gargoyles or anything along those lines. I think Gargoyles are already good enough as well, who we're about to get to, I think. Yeah, there they are. I'd say most Abyssal Dwarf players probably consider Gargoyles an auto-include at least 1 or 2 units. I've seen most people nowadays taking 2 units. I've only got 1 painted, so that's all I use. But I would definitely consider adding another one at some point. So don't think they need any kind of changes. Any kind of formation with Gargoyles and Basusu I think would be overkill. Next, we've got the half-breeds. Now these have definitely been changed. So the issue with them is that they die and get wavered really easily. So they've given them Fury, which means you can be less concerned about chasing down enemy chaff, like small fast cavalry units that are going to be faster than the half-breeds and can get the charge in on you first. Often I would be concerned facing units like that because they could do 3 or 4 damage maybe and then waver you, which messes up your whole battle line. They're an expensive killer unit that you want to be fighting things, not stuck wavered by dogs or wolves or something. So Fury is useful there. Some people are saying that's not enough of a change and that they'll still get shot to bits, but the way I've used them, typically they don't tend to get shot that much. I usually put them behind the rest of my line so that they can come steaming in when the fighting started and just pick a high value target and kill it, or pick a low value target where there won't be repercussions for killing it, because you don't want to trade this expensive unit for something feeble and then have them immediately get killed from a charge from something else. So keeping them safe was always a priority. That makes them slightly more survivable, slightly higher chance of staying in the game, and like all the units really, because a lot of my inspiring comes from the Iron Casters in this list that I like to generally run, because even though Brekkie has very inspiring, he often runs off on his own, so he can't always be relied on to inspire. So with these staying behind my lines, they're quite often within range of the Iron Caster, so there's a good chance that they will benefit from that inspiring because they weren't previously inspired by the Iron Caster, and now they will be. So depending how you build your list, there's another potential little boost there. Greater Obsidian Golem. It's just good, it's nice, it's square, gives you more options for surging. It's just good, I think. No issues at all. Always compared it favourably to the Hellfane, although the Hellfane has had some boosts now, so maybe it'll have some competition in my lists. Am I going to be able to fit those and an Ancient Winged Half-Breed in there? At 2,000 points, definitely not. I wouldn't be able to fit those 3 Titans in. It would definitely be overkill. So, previously it's been the Hellfane that's been the first one to miss out. We'll see whether that changes. Iron Caster, conditional inspiring turning into universal inspiring is obviously a big boost for any of those characters, and this is one in particular. Would I like to see Iron Casters get any other little boosts? I don't think it's really necessary. They're very useful, they do a good job, they boost some already very powerful units with their presence, and even when they're not doing that, they have other useful abilities as well with their Fireball. Can heal a decent chunk of the army. It'd be nice if they could heal everything. So, Brekkie and then half-breed champions in general. Brekkie, obviously, I always take him. Very good. Very tasty. Piles of rules on him. Doesn't need to change. Half-breed champion, also a really good choice. Pretty inexpensive, really. And overall, very versatile, useful, and cheap. So, I don't think they need any changes. However, I wouldn't mind a formation taking maybe some half-breeds and a half-breed champion, and they both get some kind of boost, because half-breeds probably need it. They're one of the units that are considered weak, not optimal. So another boost on those would be nice if you took a half-breed champion in there. It would be a good thematic formation. And there's my entire Abyssal Dwarf collection. I think that's everything in there. I don't think I've painted anything new since this picture was taken. So, I think I've been through everything on there. Units that I don't actually own, though, would include Berserkers, who may well get the Slayer rule, which is, I described Rampage earlier, where you get extra attacks if you're a big monster against smaller things. I believe Slayer is the reverse, so you get extra attacks against big monster type things. So I would expect Berserkers to get something like that thrown on them. The main issue with them isn't the rules, though. It's kind of the models. They're quite expensive. They're old, you have to order them direct from Mantic, and they're not the best. So probably converting or using other ranges miniatures for them, which isn't really what I like to do with this army. This was actually intended to be my tournament full Mantic army, but since I painted it, of course they've gone and changed the rules on that so that you have to have 75% of the models represented on the base now, which is not possible with my units the way that they're spaced out. So the Immortal Guard definitely wouldn't be able to fit 75%. The Golems I could easily squeeze an extra one in, but some of the units it would not be possible to fit that many onto the base. So that was kind of unfortunate that they did that. So I'm having to go for the full 75% plus with my Night Stalkers instead. So that's the plan with them. I mean, quite a few of the units in here do actually meet the criteria. So the half-breeds do, because they're quite narrow, so you can fit a lot of them on the base. And the Gargoyles do not. The Infantry do not. They're quite spaced out. But the Grotesques, I've got 5 of them because I based them up as a horde, because I decided I was just never going to run them as regiments, so they're all in one base, which is why there's 5 of them. The Golems are on regiment bases, though, so that's why there's only 2 on there, because really, you have to be pretty crazy to fit 3 on. And people do it, I've seen people do it, and it looks good, but I think they look fine with 4 on the base. So if I really wanted to use this army at a big tournament and be eligible for one of the big prizes, then maybe I would look into slapping a few extra models on there. But anyway, that's what the Night Stalkers are going to be for. So, talked about Berserkers. What else is in the list? Let me get the rulebook out again. There's probably a couple of entries in the Abyssal Dwarf army that I do not own that I've completely forgotten to mention so far. Let's see. Here we go. So, yeah, there are some that I've forgotten. So, first of all, let's start with Slave Orcs. So, I did buy some Orcs with the intention, well, I say buy, I actually won them at an event. So I won some Orcs and was going to use them as Slave Orcs, but I just wasn't feeling it, and I didn't want to like water down the aesthetic of my Abyssal Dwarf army. So I stuck with keeping them pure, didn't put any Orcs in there, and I eventually sold them. So no kind of formation would cause me to compromise my aesthetic principles for the army, and to make me put the effort in of painting that many Orcs, because I've got so much to work on anyway. Let's see what else. Slave Orc Gore Riders, same story, don't need to repeat myself there. Mutated Mastiff Hunting Pack. So that is a unit that I would look into if I could get enough of the Abyssal Dwarf Mastiffs, or find some alternative dogs, since this no longer qualifies as an all-mantic army for prize purposes anyway. Then I could get some alternative models for the angry Abyssal doggies. So potentially there. I don't think they really need much. They look pretty decent in the stats. They're very cheap. I will say though that their one issue is that they are not gargoyles. The role that you would want them for, are they competing directly with gargoyles? At that point cost they probably are. Something to just throw in the way. I'd compare them to more beasts, really, when I look at their speed and the amount of damage they can put out. And I don't think they quite do enough to warrant putting them in the list when there are gargoyles available who are just really fast. So maybe they could use something to give them a bit of a boost. It depends. If you're constantly coming up against enemy cavalry, and that's very big in your area, lots of cavalry hoofing it around, then maybe they're fine as they are. So situational, depends what you come up against. So it's hard to really judge whether they need any kind of boost, because it depends what kind of thing you face personally. The war machines, I talked a bit about them. I think the changes to the amount of blast and the number of attacks on them did even up the war machines a bit, so it's not so obvious that the heavy mortar is the one to go for. But I didn't mention also that in this edition they changed the way cover for artillery works as well, for indirect fire, which was a bit of a hit to them as well. Dragonfire Team. Now I do have one of these, but it's only half painted. I never bothered finishing it because I used them in version 2 and I just had, I think it was my Abyssal Dwarf Vanguard, an Immortal Guard and a Decimator blue tacked onto a cavalry base, and that's what I used for my Dragonfire teams because they were comparable to war trombones, just a little breath attack that can follow around your battle line and annoy the enemy. But main issue with the Dragonfire team compared to a war trombone is that it does not have piercing, because Vicious is not quite as good as piercing, and that's the issue I have with it. And I think just from playing Goblins, whenever I look down the list and think, do I want to spend 85 points on this short range war machine that can follow me around? Because it's a war engine, or do I spend those 85 points on gargoyles who are really fast, can, as I often use them for, can claim table sections and objectives, or they can just fly off ahead and block obscenely powerful enemy units so you can advance and destroy other things. Maybe it's just because they're exactly the same amount of points as the gargoyles that draws that comparison. But that is how it is. Competing for spots in the list with some good choices, you've got to be optimal looking. So that's why it doesn't really move ahead on my painting desk. Slave driver. So, inspiring is obviously nice. Very cheap, so very cheap source of inspiring. I do have one, just never bothered painting it because I wasn't going to get any slaves. Rally 1 to slaves only. So if you're going to take an army with slaves, then it's obviously a fine choice for only 55 points. But I've just never went for it because I gave up on the slave orcs. Taskmaster on Chariot. Now I do have an Abyssal Dwarf Chariot, and I bought some mutated rabbit things to pull it along, which I was going to make a special model for an Easter themed tournament, which was then cancelled because of the worldwide pandemic. But I've still got it unpainted, so I may get the Chariot eventually. So without ever using it, that's got rally for slaves only as well. So in a slave army again, probably useful. But I don't have enough experience using that kind of army to give you too much valuable input there. Anything else we've got here? I think that is the entire list I've gone through now. So, those are some units that I think could do with a bit of tweaking. Anything that I think doesn't quite measure up or is ridiculously amazing already, doesn't need it. If I still don't have the Clash of Kings book for the next few weeks, because I'm not sure of the exact release date, then there will be some other alternative content before then. I may go through goblins as well, since they're obviously an army that I've played a lot over the years. Abyssal Dwarves are just the army that I've got the most recent experience with, so it seemed wise to start with them, since you could say I'm kind of a big deal in the Abyssal Dwarf community, being the highest ranked Abyssal Dwarf player on the UK rankings website. So you should take what I say seriously and implement any changes I suggest. I reckon, Mantic. Anyway, on that note, let's get the old episode thumbnail in the way of my face again. And this has been Kings of War Wednesday. For anyone who was here for this live, then you'll have witnessed the exciting interruption in the middle, which has no doubt been edited out by now. So well done to all of you. For the discussion in the comments, do you agree with any of my points here? Do you think I was incorrect? Do you think the units that I'm not experienced with need any tweaks? If you've got more knowledge with them. Which armies do you think needed the most attention in this upcoming Clash of Kings book? Which ones maybe need toning down? Because obviously I'm an Abyssal Dwarf player, I'm not going to tell you if anything needs to get weaker, because that would just be hurting my chances at tournaments. But there are a couple of units probably, so anyone who's played against Abyssal Dwarfs, which units would you like to see get weaker because you just think they're too strong, that the Abyssal Dwarf community would be outraged at if you suggested it? But I'm willing to listen, I'm willing to hear the critique from those on the other side of the table about how strong some of the units are, if that's your opinion. So drop it in the comments and I shall respond. And I'm going to hope to arrange a Kings of War game very, very soon. But there's also the chance that it'll be interrupted temporarily by Dead Zone, because I'm currently waiting for the new Dead Zone rulebook to arrive in my hands, which should be happening any day now. So I'm going to be playing a bit of that as well. And keep your eyes peeled for more Kings of War content. Obviously, Kings of War Wednesday will be back next Wednesday. I'm working on not only these live episodes, but a few of the a bit more in-depth episodes that might require a bit more planning and a bit of preparation and a bit of footage recording out there, possibly on a battlefield, pushing some models around to demonstrate a few things. One person was asking about using slow armies and getting the most out of them, which is something I feel fairly qualified to talk about, since I haven't really taken any mega speed spam armies in my time. I usually have just a big solid core of meat in my army that isn't amazingly fast, so I feel I can talk about that with some authority. If you've got any other ideas for episodes, drop them in there and we'll see if they do pop up on Kings of War Wednesday. And with that, all that remains to be said is, good afternoon out there, whatever you are.